Zuri Mensah realized she was sitting at the wrong table the moment the candlelight caught the name card, and it wasn't her name that stared back at her, neat and confident, like it belonged to someone who never apologized for taking up space. The restaurant was dressed like a postcard, with red ribbons on the chairs, frosted pine branches along the windows, and a pianist playing carols softly enough to sound like a secret. She should have stood up immediately, should have laughed at herself and fixed the mistake, but her phone buzzed with a new message from her date saying he was parking now, and the panic rose too fast to be elegant. Zuri's green dress felt suddenly too bright, like it had been made for someone braver, someone who didn't second-guess every footstep. The waiter hovered with practiced patience, and she forced a smile that felt like holding a door shut against a storm. "I think I'm early," she said, tasting the lie as it left her mouth. The waiter nodded, placed a menu down, and walked away, because it was Christmas, and on Christmas people pretended not to notice small tragedies. Zuri tried to breathe, tried to keep her shoulders relaxed, but then a man took the seat across from her without asking, as if the table had been waiting for him all along. He was 31, maybe, with a calm face that didn't seek permission from the room, and when he looked at her, the warmth in his eyes was careful, as if warmth was something he had learned to ration. His suit was dark and clean, his hands steady, his gaze direct in a way that made Zuri's pulse jump and then scold her for jumping. "You're not Mina," he said quietly, not accusing, just stating a fact the way someone states the weather. Zuri's throat tightened, and her first instinct was to apologize for existing, because that was the habit life had trained into her. "I'm sorry," she replied, then hated how small she sounded. "I sat in the wrong place, and I swear I'm not trying to." "I'll move." The man's attention did not waver, and that was what unsettled her most, because most men looked away when they realized they had misread a situation, but he looked closer. "You're dressed like someone who didn't plan to run," he said, voice low, almost gentle. Zuri blinked, caught between embarrassment and the strange feeling of being seen without being judged. "I plan to meet someone," she admitted, trying to regain control of her face. "It's Christmas, and I told myself I would stop canceling my own life." The man's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but something like amusement that had survived hardship. "Then don't cancel it," he said, and he leaned back as if he had all the time in the world, as if time belonged to him. Zuri looked past him toward the entrance, searching for the familiar face she expected, but the door kept opening for other couples, other promises. She should have stood up, should have walked away, but the stranger's presence felt like a hand pressed gently against her racing thoughts, slowing them down. "I'm Zuri," she said, because silence felt like surrender. He held her gaze like it mattered. "Han Junwoo," he replied, and the name landed with a weight she did not yet understand. Zuri had spent most of her 25 years learning how to be useful before learning how to be loved, and the difference had shaped her like a quiet bruise. She was the woman people called dependable, the woman managers praised for being low maintenance, the woman friends leaned on and forgot to thank. Even tonight had taken weeks of arguing with herself, because dating meant risk, and risk meant being disappointed again, and disappointment always felt like proof that she should have stayed invisible. She had told herself this Christmas would be different, that she would wear the green dress she had bought on a rare day of courage, that she would let a man take her out without preparing an escape plan in her head. Her date, Malik, was kind on text messages and careless in real life, and Zuri had overlooked the pattern because she wanted the story to work. Now she sat across from Han Junwoo, who looked like he belonged to a world where mistakes were expensive, and she wondered why her heart was beating like it recognized danger and wanted it anyway. "You can keep sitting," he said, as if he had read the way she was bracing herself. "If you move now, you'll look like you're running from something." Zuri exhaled slowly, then tried to laugh, but it came out fragile. "I'm not running," she insisted, then lowered her voice. "I'm just embarrassed." He looked at the centerpiece, a small ornament shaped like a silver bell, then back at her. "Embarrassment is not fatal," he said, and something in his tone made it sound like he had survived worse than embarrassment. Zuri glanced at his hands again, noticing the faint scar near his knuckle, the kind that didn't come from office work or gym accidents. "So, who is Mina?" she asked, because curiosity was safer than confessing she felt drawn to him. His gaze sharpened for a moment, then softened, as if he chose softness on purpose. Someone who thinks she knows me, he replied. Someone who likes the idea of me more than the reality. Zuri felt a sting of recognition, because she had been guilty of that too. Not with him, but with Malik, with every version of happiness she had begged herself to accept. The waiter returned, eyes flicking between them, uncertain, and Han spoke with quiet authority. "Bring 2 glasses of water," he said, and the waiter nodded instantly, relieved to have clear instructions. Zuri watched the exchange, sensing power, without hearing it announced. "You act like you're used to being obeyed," she said, and she meant it as a joke, but it came out as truth. Han studied her face, as if deciding whether she was safe to be honest with. "I'm used to people listening," he answered, "because when they don't, things get messy." Zuri's breath caught, and she told herself it was just an intense way of speaking, just confidence, nothing more. Still, her palms were cold, and her instincts were awake. "I should text Malik," she said, reaching for her phone like it was a life raft. Han didn't stop her, but his voice was steady. "If he's late," he said, "he should be the one explaining." Zuri stared at the screen, then saw Malik's last message again, casual and careless, and the frustration rose. "He said he was parking," she murmured. Han tilted his head slightly. "How long ago?" Zuri hesitated. 20 minutes, she admitted. Han's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did, like disappointment on her behalf. "Then he's not parking," he said. "He's choosing." The pianist shifted into a softer carol, and the restaurant lights seemed to glow warmer, as if the room wanted to convince everyone they were safe. Zuri hated how much she wanted to stay at the table, because staying felt like admitting she wanted this stranger's attention more than she wanted Malik's approval. Han's presence was not flirtatious in the obvious way, and that made it worse, because it felt real, like he wasn't performing. "Why are you here?" she asked, because she needed to anchor herself to something practical. Han glanced toward the bar, where 2 men stood too still, watching without pretending to watch. Zuri noticed them only because Han looked that way, and when she looked back, her stomach tightened. "Do you know them?" she whispered. Han's voice stayed calm. "They're with me," he said, and that should have sounded protective, but it sounded like a warning wrapped in velvet. Zuri forced herself to smile at the waiter when he returned with water, then leaned closer. "With you like friends?" she asked, "or with you like security?" Han's eyes met hers, and he didn't insult her intelligence by pretending. "Security," he confirmed. Zuri's mind raced, reaching for explanations that didn't involve danger. "Are you famous?" she asked, and she felt ridiculous the moment she said it. Han's lips curved slightly. "Not the kind that signs autographs," he replied. Zuri swallowed, trying to keep her voice steady. "Then why do you need security?" Han didn't answer immediately, and the silence felt heavy, intentional. "Because people assume they can take things from me," he finally said. "And because sometimes they are right." Zuri's chest tightened, and she felt the irrational urge to protect him, which made no sense, because he looked like someone who could protect a whole city if he wanted to. "You're scaring me," she admitted, then hated the honesty, hated how exposed it made her. Han leaned forward slightly, not invading her space, just closing the distance enough that his presence felt like a shield against the room. "I won't hurt you," he said, and the calm certainty in his tone made her believe him before her brain could argue. Zuri searched his face for a crack, for a sign of manipulation, but all she saw was control and something quieter underneath, something that looked like loneliness. "I came here for a date," she said again, as if repeating it could make it true. "And I ended up at the wrong table." Han's gaze dropped to her hands, then back to her eyes. "Maybe it's the right table," he said, and the words were simple, but they landed like a door opening in her chest. Zuri almost laughed, because it sounded like a line from a romance movie, but his voice didn't carry the smugness of someone trying to charm her. It carried sincerity, and sincerity was dangerous, because it invited hope. "You don't even know me," she whispered. Han's expression softened. "I know you're trying," he replied. "And I know you're tired of pretending you're fine." Zuri felt her throat burn, because he was too close to the truth, and she didn't understand how. She looked away, blinking hard, then her phone buzzed again. Malik's message appeared, short and careless. "Got held up. Might be another 30. Just order without me." Zuri stared at the screen until the words blurred, and something in her finally snapped into clarity. She wasn't just waiting for a man tonight, she was waiting for herself to matter. Han watched her face, and he didn't ask what the message said, as if he already knew. You don't have to accept that, he said quietly. Zuri swallowed, then met his gaze. What if this is just how it is? She asked, voice shaking, and I'm the one expecting too much? Han's reply came without hesitation. Expecting respect is not too much, he said. It's the minimum. When the door opened again, Zuri looked up out of habit, hoping and dreading at the same time, and Malik finally appeared, cheeks flushed from the cold, hair damp, smile careless. His eyes scanned the room, landed on Zuri, then landed on Han, and something sharp crossed his face before he forced it into a grin. He walked over like the scene belonged to him, like Zuri's time had always been his to borrow. Babe, sorry, Malik said, sliding into the empty chair beside Zuri without asking, without noticing how she stiffened. Traffic was crazy, and my friend called, and you know how it is. Zuri stared at him, hearing the excuses the way she had always heard them, like background noise that was supposed to be accepted. Malik finally looked at Han properly, and his grin tightened. Who's this? Malik asked, tone light but eyes calculating. Zuri's mouth opened, but Han answered first, polite and controlled. Han Junwoo, he said, offering nothing else, as if his name alone was enough. Malik laughed too loudly, then glanced at Zuri. Why is he sitting here? Malik asked, and the possessiveness in his voice made Zuri's stomach turn. Zuri forced herself to speak, because she refused to disappear again. I sat at the wrong table, she said, and he was already here. Malik's eyebrows rose, and he leaned back like a judge. So you just stayed? He said, and the accusation slid into his words like a blade. Zuri felt heat rise in her face, and she hated that she still wanted to defend herself. You were late, she replied, and her voice was steadier than she expected. Malik waved a hand dismissively. I told you I'd be late, he said. I said just order. Zuri looked at him, then at the untouched menu, then at Han's calm face, and she felt something inside her realign. You didn't tell me you'd be late, she corrected. You told me you were parking. Malik's smile faltered, and his eyes flicked to Han again, measuring. Okay, Malik said slowly, so move then. This is our date. Han didn't flinch, but Zuri noticed the subtle shift in the room, the way the men by the bar straightened, the way the waiter paused as if sensing a storm about to break. Zuri's heart beat hard, not from fear of Malik, but from the realization that she had been shrinking for men like him her whole life. Malik, she said quietly, you told me to order without you, and you disappeared for 50 minutes, Malik scoffed. Don't be dramatic, he said, and the word dramatic hit Zuri like an insult to her dignity. She had carried whole worlds alone without calling it drama. Malik leaned forward, lowering his voice as if he was being generous. Look, he murmured, it's Christmas. Don't make a scene. This guy can go, and we can reset. Zuri felt her hands tremble, then she placed them flat on the table, grounding herself. Why do you talk to me like I'm a problem? She asked, and her voice cracked on the last word. Malik blinked, annoyed now, because he hadn't expected her to ask that out loud. Because you're acting like one, he snapped, then forced another smile when he realized people might be listening. Han's voice cut through the tension, calm as a blade being unsheathed. She's not the problem, he said. Malik turned to him sharply. And you are? Malik challenged, trying to laugh it off. Some random guy stealing someone else's date? Han's gaze stayed steady, and his tone stayed polite, which made it more intimidating. I'm someone who doesn't lie to her face, Han replied. Zuri's breath caught, and she felt the room tilt, because she hadn't realized how much she needed to hear someone defend her without asking for anything in return. Malik's jaw tightened, and he stood slightly, posture aggressive. You don't even know her, he said, voice rising. Zuri felt the old instinct to soothe, to apologize, to make it easier for everyone else, but she forced herself to stay still. Han looked at Malik with quiet certainty. I know enough, he said. I know she waited, and you didn't care. Malik's eyes flashed, and he pointed at Zuri like she was a possession. Zuri, he said sharply. Tell him to leave. Zuri stared at Malik's hand, then at Han's face, And she realized the strangest thing. With Han, she felt seen. With Malik, she felt managed. The manager approached with nervous politeness, hovering at the edge of the table as if afraid of being pulled into the conflict. "Is everything all right here?" the manager asked, smiling too hard. Malik exhaled dramatically, as if Zuri was the inconvenience ruining his holiday. "We're fine," Malik said, then glanced at Han. "This guy just won't leave." The manager looked at Han with that cautious deference people reserved for men who looked expensive, then looked at Zuri as if she was the least important variable. Zuri felt the familiar sting of invisibility, and it almost broke her because even now, even on Christmas, she was being treated like background. Han's voice was calm, but it carried a quiet authority that changed the air. "We're not causing trouble," Han said. "But she will not be spoken to like that." The manager swallowed, eyes flicking toward the bar again, toward the two men who were watching like statues. "Of course," the manager said quickly, and his smile turned strained. Malik noticed the shift, noticed the manager's sudden caution, and his bravado wavered for half a second before he tried to reclaim it. "What is this?" Malik muttered. "Some kind of rich guy act." Han's gaze moved to Zuri, and the way he looked at her felt like asking permission witut needing words. Zuri's chest tightened, because part of her wanted to run, but a bigger part of her wanted to stay and finally face the truth about what she accepted. "Malik," she said, voice low but firm. "You didn't even ask if I was okay." Malik scoffed. "You're okay," he said, as if he could decide that for her. Zuri felt heat rise behind her eyes, and she hated that tears were always waiting so close to the surface, like her body refused to pretend anymore. "I waited," she said, "and I kept telling myself you had a good reason, because I didn't want to believe I was an option." Malik's face hardened, and he leaned closer, lowering his voice into something sharp. "Don't do this," he warned. "Not here." Zuri's hands clenched, then relaxed, and she surprised herself with the steadiness of her next words. "This is exactly where I should do it," she replied. Malik stared at her like he didn't recognize her, like he preferred the quieter version who swallowed everything. Han remained still, but his presence felt like a wall behind her, not pushing her forward, just keeping her from falling backward. Malik looked around, sensing eyes on him now, sensing judgment, and he tried to turn it into a joke. "All right," he laughed. "So you met some random dude and suddenly you're brave." Zuri's voice was soft, but it carried weight. "I was brave before," she said. "You just didn't notice, because my bravery didn't entertain you." Malik's smile collapsed. "Whatever," he snapped, grabbing his coat. "Have fun with your whoever he is." He walked away fast, as if leaving first could protect his pride, and Zuri watched him go with a strange mixture of sadness and relief. When the door closed behind Malik, Zuri realized her hands were shaking, and she hated that she still felt guilty, as if she had done something wrong by asking for basic respect. Han didn't rush her, didn't fill the space with reassurance that sounded rehearsed. He simply slid his glass of water closer to her, a quiet gesture that felt more intimate than compliments. "You did the hard part," he said gently. Zuri laughed once, breathless and disbelieving. "It didn't feel hard," she admitted. "It felt like I was finally tired enough." Han's eyes softened, and for the first time his expression looked almost vulnerable. "Sometimes tired is what saves you," he said. Zuri wiped at her cheek quickly, angry at the tear that escaped, and Han didn't comment on it, as if he understood dignity. "So," Zuri whispered, trying to steady herself, "why does the manager look like he's about to faint when you speak?" Han paused, and the pause felt like the edge of a cliff. "Because he knows my name," Han answered, voice low, controlled. "And because people in this city know what my family is." Zuri's breath caught. "What is your family?" she asked, though something in her already suspected the answer would rearrange her night. Han held her gaze, and in the candlelight his calm looked like something earned through violence and restraint. "They call me a boss," he said, not boasting, not threatening, simply revealing. "And tonight, you sat at my table without knowing who you were sitting with." Zuri felt the word boss echo in her chest long after Han Junwoo said it, not because she suddenly feared him, but because she sensed the weight of what he carried so calmly. The restaurant noise faded into something distant, like she had stepped into a pocket of stillness carved just for them. A boss like she began, then stopped, because finishing the sentence felt dangerous. Han didn't rush her, didn't correct her, just watched with an honesty that made her feel oddly safe. A Korean mafia boss, he said quietly, and there was no drama in it, no attempt to impress or intimidate, only fact. Zuri laughed once, sharp and disbelieving, because if she didn't laugh, she might cry or bolt for the door. Of course you are, she muttered, pressing her fingers against the edge of the table as if it anchored her to reality. Because why wouldn't my Christmas turn into this? Han's lips curved, a real smile this time, brief and restrained. You're taking it better than most people, he said. Zuri looked at him, really looked at the composure, the scars, the way the room subtly bent around him, and she realized something unsettling. I don't feel afraid, she admitted. And that scares me more than if I did. Han's gaze softened, and he leaned back slightly, giving her space. You should be cautious, he said honestly. But fear and caution are not the same thing. Zuri exhaled slowly, her heartbeat still loud in her ears. Do people know? She asked. Han glanced toward the windows, where snow fell steadily, softening the city. People who matter, he replied. And people who are smart. Zuri shook her head, a small smile tugging at her mouth despite herself. I sat at the wrong table and accidentally went on a date with a mafia boss, she said. No one is going to believe me. Han's eyes held hers, warm despite the words he had just spoken. I didn't say this was a date, he said gently. Zuri felt heat bloom in her chest, unexpected and unwelcome. Then what is it? She asked. Han's answer came after a pause, deliberate. A moment where you didn't settle, he said. Those are rare, Zuri swallowed, because something about the way he said it made her feel like he was talking about himself too. Does Mina know who you are? She asked quietly. Han's jaw tightened just enough to be noticeable. She knows the title, he replied. She doesn't know the cost, Zuri nodded, understanding that too well, because people often admired strength without asking what it took to build it. Why were you meeting her tonight? Zuri asked, bracing herself. Han met herr Geis, unflinching. Because my family wanted an appearance, he said. And because I was tired of disappointing people who never see me. Zuri's chest ached at the familiarity of that confession. So you were pretending, she murmured. Han inclined his head slightly. And you, he said, were waiting for someone who didn't show up. The symmetry made her breath catch. What happens now? Zuri asked, because the question felt too big to leave unanswered. Han studied her face like he was memorizing it. Now, he said, you decide what you want, without apologizing for it. They stayed at the table longer than either of them planned, talking in low voices while the restaurant slowly emptied. The Christmas decorations dimming as staff began quiet cleanup. Zuri learned that Han had grown up fast, that responsibility had found him before he was ready, that leadership had been forced into his hands by loss rather than ambition. Han learned that Zuri had built her life carefully, brick by brick, because no one had ever promised her a safety net. Their words were cautious, but something deeper flowed underneath, an unspoken recognition between two people who understood restraint too well. You don't fit the picture, Zuri said softly at one point. Han raised an eyebrow. What picture is that? Zuri smiled faintly. The one people tell themselves, so they don't have to see the person, she replied. Han's gaze lingered on her, and the intensity made her pulse quicken. You see me, he said, not as a question. Zuri nodded. I think I do, she answered. And that's why this feels dangerous, Han's voice dropped, intimate but controlled. Danger doesn't always mean harm, he said. Sometimes it means change. Zuri laughed under her breath. You really know how to say things, she murmured. Han's lips curved slightly. I know how to survive, he corrected. When the waiter returned with the bill, Han reached for it without ceremony, but Zuri placed her hand over his, surprising both of them. Let me, she said. Han looked at her hand, then back at her face, and something unreadable passed through his eyes. Why? He asked. Zuri held his gaze, steady. Because I don't want this to feel like something you bought, she said. Han considered her words, then nodded, slowly, withdrawing his hand. All right, he said. But next time, I choose. Zuri's breath caught at the implication, and she told herself not to read into it, even as her heart betrayed her. Outside, the cold air hit her cheeks sharply, grounding her as they stepped onto the snow-dusted sidewalk. The city felt quieter, softer, like it was holding its breath. Han's security kept a respectful distance, close enough to be present, far enough to allow privacy. Zuri tucked her hands into her coat, suddenly aware of how small she felt beside him, not in stature, but in the enormity of his world. "You don't have to walk me," she said automatically, the old habit of minimizing her needs resurfacing. Han stopped, turning to face her fully, and the streetlight cast shadows across his face, making him look both formidable and gentle. "I want to," he said simply. Zuri nodded, unable to argue without lying. They walked side by side, their shoulders almost touching, the space between them charged and careful. "What happens if I get closer to you?" Zuri asked quietly, her breath fogging in the air. Han's jaw tightened, and he answered honestly. "Then my world touches yours," he said. "And I would never let it harm you." Zuri stopped walking, forcing him to stop too. "You can't promise that," she said, voice firm despite the tremor underneath. Han met her gaze, eyes dark and steady. "I can promise effort," he replied. "And I don't promise lightly." Zuri searched his face, weighing risk against instinct, logic against the way her chest warmed when he looked at her like she mattered. "I'm not looking to be saved," she said. Han's expression softened. "Good," he said. "I wouldn't respect you if you were." The honesty between them felt fragile and powerful all at once, like glass that hadn't shattered yet. When they reached her building, Zuri hesitated at the entrance, suddenly afraid of what leaving would mean. "This was supposed to be a disaster," she said quietly. Han smiled, small and real. "It still could be," he replied. "But it could also be something else." Zuri laughed softly. "You're impossible," she said. Han inclined his head. "So, I've been told." The moment stretched, heavy with unsaid things, until Zuri realized her heart was pounding not with fear, but with want. She stepped closer before she could overthink it, and Han's breath hitched just enough for her to notice. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted. Han lifted a hand slowly, stopping just short of touching her cheek, silently asking permission. Zuri nodded, and his fingers brushed her skin, warm against the cold. The touch was gentle, reverent, nothing like the careless familiarity she had accepted in the past. "Neither do I," Han said quietly. "But I know I don't want to forget tonight." Zuri's throat tightened. "Then don't," she whispered. Han leaned in, and their foreheads touched, a breath apart, the world narrowing to that fragile space. When his lips finally met hers, the kiss was slow and careful, like he was learning her rather than claiming her. Zuri felt something inside her soften and strengthen at the same time, a sense of being chosen without being possessed. When they pulled apart, her breath was unsteady, and Han's eyes searched her face, as if committing it to memory. "This complicates things," Zuri murmured.
Han smilade faintly.
"My life has been complicated for a long time," he said. "This feels honest." Zuri laughed softly, pressing her forehead to his again. "I can't believe this is happening," she said. Han's thumb traced a small arc along her jaw. "Believe it," he replied. "You earned it." As he stepped back, giving her space once more, Zuri realized something profound had shifted, not just between them, but within her. She wasn't invisible tonight. She wasn't settling. She was standing in the cold with a man who saw her clearly, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what might come next.